I had assumed that this new chapter in my life would begin under more favorable conditions, but now it does. My husband, Kevin, has demolished our family home, leaving me standing in front of an empty place where both of my parents once stood. Here, amidst the ruins of my early years, Kevin startlingly disclosed his actual motivations. "What topic are you discussing? Are you crazy? Bring your inheritance to our house now," he yelled. His direct remarks rendered me mute. Still, as the ridiculousness of the scenario struck me, I couldn't hold back my laughter. "Oh, I see. That's what this whole thing was about," I murmured, shaking my head cynically. My spouse Kevin and his parents stared at me in disbelief, not understanding why I would respond the way I did. I took a moment to reintroduce myself, hoping that would clear things up. Brenda is my name. I'm the modest daughter of a dedicated salaried worker from a lowly beginning. When I was 28, I was married to Kevin, and together we raised 3 amazing kids. Now that I'm 50, I had anticipated a calm existence with my spouse, but circumstances had other ideas. I talked about how difficult it was to care for my sick parents, especially my mother's lengthy battle with cancer. Kevin's support was lacking in spite of the toll it took on me, both emotionally and physically. He frequently bemoaned the hardships of sharing my mother's illness, criticizing everything from the cleaning to the food. In the end, we returned to my parents' house so that my mother could receive better care. Kevin continued to be indifferent to her worsening illness throughout this time, which resulted in her being admitted to the hospital and ultimately passing away. It was distressing to see Kevin act so detached during the funeral arrangements. Even during the funeral, when I really needed his support, he remained distant, choosing to sit in the rear with other distant relatives rather than in the family area with me. I had said to him in a whisper, "I wish you would sit with the family," throughout the service. His response was icy and disengaged. "No, I'm not uncomfortable here. After all, I'm not a blood related," he declared. Hearing us talk, his mother interrupted, saying, "He's your spouse, not your mother's son." Here, Kevin is an outsider. Kevin was detached from his family, and his parents echoed him when they said he shouldn't sit in the family area, even while stories and whispers went around among distant relatives about our tense relationship. They argued that, in spite of the evident stress it created, this commitment to custom was justified. Kevin's parents and my brother's family joined us at my house following the funeral. I remained calm and brought them coffee in spite of their previous insensitivity. But what really got me was their comment about how expensive condolence money is, which made it clear how they really felt about the whole thing. The truth of my new life without my parents, and with a partner who seemed more like a stranger than a spouse, dawned forcibly on me as I stood in the rubble of my boyhood home. I forced a grin and exited the room, watching with heavy heart as I overheard bits and pieces of conversation between Kevin and his parents. They were talking, with a hint of derision, about how hard it was to live with me. It wasn't the first time they had behaved disrespectfully. In fact, it had been a recurring topic in our marriage, made especially difficult by the recent death of my mother and the funeral of my father. When I thought back on these times, I saw how little they had bothered and how much I had put up with. It was terrible to see Kevin's disengagement and even his guilt about the living arrangements I had forced upon him. I heard them laughing behind me, berating me for not allowing them to take my mother's possessions. Kevin and his parents stormed out, labeling me an outsider, when I asked that her mementos be divided among our family members, causing a heated confrontation. Following the event, Kevin took a temporary leave of absence. He surprised me by saying he was worried and by giving me and the kids travel vouchers for a vacation. I was surprised by his abrupt change in attitude, but I was also glad. I asked in jest, I wonder if your father felt guilty, as I took the coupons. Kevin, feeling more laid back than normal, told me to take my time. Yeah, stay at the kids' places if you like, he said, indicating that he intended to relax at his parents' house while I was away. Following his advice, I visited my son Stephen and daughter Susan before the trip. Seeing them during the time I was taking care of my mother had been challenging. To lessen their everyday difficulties, I spent some time preparing and freezing meals for them. Mom, you never get to relax, but thank you. This helps, they both said, appreciative of the home-cooked meals. Thanks to Kevin's unexpected gesture, the trip finally came, and I spent a relaxing time at the hotel with my children. The break seemed to wash away some of the fatigue and sorrow from the months of caregiving and the loss of my parents. After nearly a week, we returned home with renewed spirits and bright smiles. That was fun. We should thank Dad once in a while, Susan suggested, a sentiment that caught me off guard. Really, once in a while? I replied, still unsure about the sudden shift in Kevin's behavior, but willing to acknowledge his effort. This time, I couldn't help but chuckle, albeit with a tinge of suspicion. But I wonder if he's up to something, I said half-jokingly. Susan quickly dismissed my doubts. Don't say that. Your father must have had his reasons, she replied confidently. I smiled, planning to return home, share the wonderful memories with Kevin, and perhaps start afresh in our married life. However, the scene that greeted me upon my return left me speechless. What's going on? The house is. My voice trailed off as I took in the sight of where our family home once stood, now shockingly absent. Then Kevin appeared, his parents smirking behind him, their expressions unnervingly gleeful. Kevin, what's the meaning of this? I demanded, my confusion turning to anger. Kevin, mirroring his parents' unsettling smiles, responded, finally, the baggage is gone. From today, we'll be living with my parents at my house. His words hit me like a cold splash of water. Why are you talking about this? I countered, struggling to maintain my composure against Kevin's arrogant declaration. He coldly continued, lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Come to our house with the inheritance already. Everything you inherited belongs to me. The truth was stark and painful. The disappearance of my house was Kevin's doing, all for inheritance. Despite the overwhelming mix of frustration and sadness, I refused to let Kevin manipulate the situation. No way, I thought to myself and burst into laughter at their smug faces. What? Why are you laughing? What a strange woman. Has she gone mad? My mother-in-law muttered, looking at me as if I were a ghost. Facing them squarely, I declared, don't you guys know? I didn't inherit a single penny, so there's no inheritance. My laughter resumed, mocking their greedy assumptions. Kevin, confused and angry, demanded, what do you mean? Explain yourself. But I chose silence. There was no need to enlighten them further. I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, do it alone, I said firmly, rejecting his proposal outright. My mother-in-law's anger flared. You helped with your parents' household, but you won't do ours, she accused. You know why I did that, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? But you chose to do so because you didn't want to do housework, I retorted, leaving Kevin and his mother biting their lips in frustration. And demolishing my family home on your own. There are things you can and can't do. I yelled at them, the betrayal cutting deep. Without another word, I left the scene, Kevin's voice trailing after me. Where are you going? But I didn't look back. I needed to secure a place to sleep for the night and couldn't bear to see Kevin's face any longer. Immediately, I consulted a lawyer. It couldn't be that easy to demolish a house, especially ones still in my mother's name. Upon investigation, an unbelievable truth came to light. Kevin and my father-in-law had orchestrated the demolition themselves, utilizing acquaintances from my father-in-law's demolition company and renting heavy machinery. They had even given me the travel vouchers to conveniently get me out of the way. The realization of such deceit brought tears to my eyes and filled me with a profound sense of betrayal. Is there any way to punish the three of them? I asked the lawyer through tears, desperate for justice. The lawyer gave me a reassuring smile as he laid out the legal options. Your husband, who demolished the house registered under your mother's name without permission, can be charged with criminal damage and sued for compensation, he explained. Encouraged, I nodded, and he promptly began the legal proceedings. A few days later, an irate call from Kevin interrupted my thoughts. What's this letter of demand about? He demanded. Oh, you received it. Since you destroyed our important house, you'll have to compensate. I replied calmly, despite my rising anger. Compensate? I told you we were moving into the family home. I demolished an unused house for you. You should be grateful, not demanding compensation. Just bring your inheritance and come back home, Kevin insisted arrogantly. Grateful for having our home demolished. Really? I scoffed over the phone. And about the inheritance. And coming home. There's none to bring since I didn't inherit anything. I shouted back, my frustration evident. Kevin fell silent, caught off guard by my outburst. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was because of this. I had a whole year to spend with my mother. It was obvious we would have discussed the inheritance. I told her I don't need anything. Give it all to my brother. Thus, all cash and securities were inherited by my brother. He said that I should get the house since he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could be rented out to someone else. That was the plan for me to inherit the house. Now, either you and your father restore the family home to its original state or pay the amount written in that letter. I'm being kind enough to suggest a settlement. If you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you. I spoke firmly. Sorry, I didn't think you'd be so angry, Kevin replied, his tone changing. He began making excuses, suggesting that as long as the family home was there, he couldn't live with his parents, especially since his father had always wanted to live with us. My father-in-law was particularly fond of my son Stephen and had previously expressed a desire to live with him. They had refused to live together back then because it would have made commuting difficult, but his parents seemed to think. I was the one opposed to it. It turns out that Kevin had convinced his parents to agree to this plan by demolishing my family home and making them believe I would move in with the inheritance. This revelation only added to my resolve to see this legal battle through, ensuring that justice was served for the unwarranted destruction of my family home. Even with Kevin's new revelation, forgiveness was far beyond my grasp. Please forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. Dad is remorseful too, Kevin pleaded over the phone. If he's truly remorseful, then he'll agree to the settlement. I responded firmly before hanging up. Despite his continual apologies through calls and messages, insisting he was sorry, I remained steadfast. If you're sorry, then hurry up and transfer the money. I pushed back, knowing well that our beloved family home was beyond restoration, but seeking some form of reparation for the deep hurt caused. In the meantime, I stayed at my brother's place with Susan. My brother, aware of the situation and likely furious about the demolition done without his consent, supported my stance. I won't interfere, but I'll lend a hand. Do what you think is right, Barbara, he encouraged. Everyone around me condemned Kevin's reckless actions and supported me through this ordeal. A month passed with no compensation, and during that time, Kevin ceased all contact. I couldn't impose on Susan's hospitality indefinitely and was eager to secure the promised funds to stabilize my living situation. However, a startling discovery interrupted these plans. One day, Susan, looking at her smartphone, remarked, "This apron looks a lot like Grandma's." She showed me the screen. It was a product page on a flea market app. The item resembled a unique apron I had made for my mother. "What's this?" I asked, shocked. "This is Grandma's apron." "I made it, so there's no mistake," I said. Susan scrolled through other listings, and we found nearly 50 items that unmistakably belonged to my mother. It was clear to me that Kevin was behind this. Furious, I called him immediately. "What's this about the app, Kevin?" I demanded. He sounded annoyed and feigned ignorance. "Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's belongings, aren't you? Cancel the listings right now," I confronted him. Kevin, sounding panicked, denied everything. "What? No, it's not me," he stammered. Undeterred, I retorted, "Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over to get everything back." Susan and I drove to Kevin's parents' house. Upon arrival, I called out for Kevin, who met us at the entrance, visibly flustered. "I don't know anything about it," he insisted. Susan, supporting me, pressed him for answers. While this was happening, Kevin's parents, likely aware of our presence, came outside. His mother, seeing Susan, greeted her with a smile, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Susan, you're here," she said cheerfully. Susan, clearly upset, urged her grandmother to tell Dad to tell the truth. "The truth. It seems like Dad is selling the stuff Grandma passed away with," Susan disclosed. Hearing this, my mother-in-law laughed, dismissing the accusation. Kevin looked increasingly troubled, repeating, "It's not me." Then his mother interjected loudly, "Kevin's selling them. That can't be true." The situation escalated quickly as we confronted the tangled web of deceit, hoping to reclaim what was rightfully ours and uncover the truth behind the distressing sales. The revelation from my mother-in-law left me stunned and drained of color. "But I'm the one selling them," she cheerfully admitted, oblivious to the gravity of her actions. Kevin glanced at his mother with a worried look, clearly aware of the brewing storm. Susan, beside me, was equally shocked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you say?" I managed to utter, struggling to keep my voice steady. My mother-in-law, undeterred, continued to explain her new hobby with a light-hearted air. "It's quite a task, you know. Packaging has to be done carefully, and the photos need to be taken well," she said, treating the whole ordeal as if it were a fun pastime. She seemed completely unaware that she was handling and selling stolen goods. My frustration boiled over. "Cancel the listing." "That's not something Grandma can just sell," Susan implored, her voice breaking as she tried to reason with her grandmother. But my mother-in-law dismissed her pleas casually. "What's the big deal? I found a fun hobby. I use what I can, and the rest makes a nice little income. It's good for preventing dementia. After all, I'm the only grandma left, and Susan, you want me to stay healthy and live long, right?" she retorted, her tone flippant and dismissive. It was clear she wouldn't listen to our pleas. Realizing that talking would get us nowhere, I took decisive action. "Let's go home, Susan, but first we need to address this properly," I said, pulling a reluctant Susan with me as we left the house and headed straight to the police station. I had not initially planned to involve the police in the house demolition, but theft and unauthorized sale were a different matter entirely. The officers were prompt in their response, and the flea market app company cooperated by suspending my mother-in-law's account, ensuring no more items would be sold. After leaving the police station, I called Kevin. "I had your mother's account suspended. You knew about this, didn't you? You're complicit." Also, I filed a police report. Please cooperate with the investigation, I asserted firmly. Kevin, frantic, tried to plead family ties. We're family, aren't we? Please withdraw it. Stranger, right? I still haven't received any compensation or damages for the house being demolished, and I see no remorse from you. I countered, my anger evident. Despite my frustrations, I wasn't devoid of compassion. Having shared many years with Kevin, I sighed, acknowledging the long and possibly rocky path ahead in resolving these issues. I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Everything must be returned. And Kevin, your father looked very ill. Has he been to the hospital? I inquired, a part of me still concerned for his well-being despite everything. I had seen my father-in-law earlier, and he looked significantly thinner and unwell compared to just a few months ago. It seemed unlikely that the family had even noticed his declining health amidst their other preoccupations. The next day, my father-in-law called not to express gratitude, but to scold me. You're treating me like a sick person, planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of me. I have to protect Kevin and your mother. I'm not going to any hospital, he protested. His response to my genuine concern stung. I apologize if it was out of line. I was just concerned. I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. Don't patronize me, he snapped back, his words harsh and dismissive. His reaction only added to the complexity of our already strained relationship, leaving me to navigate these turbulent family dynamics with care and resolve. A few days after our conversation, my father-in-law's health declined significantly, leading him to seek medical attention. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Kevin, in a state of panic, called me. Dad has terminal cancer. What should I do? He asked, his voice laden with anxiety. I responded coolly, remembering past grievances. That's none of my concern. Remember what you said when I suggested the hospital. You said you're not weak and short-lived like my parents. Deal with it yourself. How can you be so heartless? Kevin retorted. Who's the heartless one? Did you ever say a kind word when my mother was sick? Reflect on your actions. I snapped back and ended the call. Sadly, my father-in-law passed away shortly after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor resentment towards someone who had passed away. But recalling all that had transpired, I found myself unable to mourn him genuinely. After the funeral, a will was discovered. It detailed that the house would be inherited by my grandson Stephen, and the remainder of the estate was to be divided between Kevin's mother and Kevin. I was surprised to see Stephen named in the will. My father-in-law had always favored him, perhaps hoping Stephen would continue to live in the house despite the inheritance potentially being more of a burden due to taxes and maintenance. Stephen was pleased to inherit the house, although I had concerns. It wasn't my place to interfere. Stephen's inheritance proceeded, and my mother-in-law, delighted, paid the inheritance taxes, claiming it was all worth it for her grandson. Despite my mixed feelings about the situation, I didn't say anything further. Then something unexpected happened. Responding to a message from Kevin, I visited his parents' house. Arriving there, I was met with a shocking sight. Heavy machinery and demolition workers were tearing down the house. It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it, right? Stephen declared, seemingly unbothered by the destruction. Stephen, what are you doing? Stop it right now. I cried out, my heart sinking. Even if I stop now, we can't live there anyway, Mom, Stephen responded calmly. My mother-in-law and Kevin, witnessing the destruction of what was once a significant asset, pleaded with Stephen to stop, but he was resolute. Have you forgotten what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Grandma, you were horrible to her too, right? Did you apologize? Stephen's tone was sharp, his earlier calmness replaced by a stern demeanor. His words cut deep, and both Kevin and his mother were visibly shaken, kneeling as the machines loudly continued their work. Witnessing the scene, I felt a complex mix of emotions, but ultimately a sense of relief. It seemed that Stephen, in his way, was settling scores and correcting past wrongs against our family. Later, Kevin, having finally received his inheritance, paid the compensation and damages owed to me. Stephen had also managed to recover the stolen items my mother-in-law took from my mother, ensuring their safe return. "Mom, you've got me and Susan," Stephen reassured. Overwhelmed by the support of my children, I finally allowed myself to shed tears of relief. Kevin and his mother, having lost their house and now, with limited resources, moved back into company housing, and their fortunes dramatically reversed. Our greatest asset persisted throughout, and that was the link between Stephen and Susan, which provided love and support to each other, even in the face of hardship. Kevin's mother and him were now the talk of the town. I was contacted by the wife of one of Kevin's coworkers, with whom I am close, following their move back into company housing. Sincerely, I told her the whole backstory. They would have to be thrifty about where they lived in the future, what with Kevin's impending retirement. Although living in corporate housing may not be comfortable for them, they created the circumstance. I occasionally considered asking friends, more out of curiosity and wanting to have a story to tell than anything else, for updates on Kevin and his mother. I kept living with Susan in the interim, but things were about to change. Thanks to the sale of the property where his parents' house formerly stood, Stephen was in a much better financial position and had plans to get married and start a new family. The money from the land had proved to be unexpectedly large, making the house that was torn down shockingly advantageous. Stephen had extended a cordial invitation to move in with him. "Mom, come live with us," and his soon-to-be wife had enthusiastically joined him. Though I knew I couldn't live with Susan forever, I accepted their offer with gratitude. I was resolved to be a mother-in-law who supported and cared for her family without going overboard. I was excited to start a new chapter in my life, one that would be full of love and respect for my growing family.